All right, everyone, here we go. Good morning, Facebook world, YouTube world, anybody who's listening on the podcast later. Guess what? We're live. Our first live Arts for the Health of It podcast.
Woohoo!
So we'll see what happens. We make no promises. This could be really fun or the worst thing that's ever happened to you in your entire life. Let us know. But if you are watching live, I think we're on Facebook, YouTube, I think maybe Twitter. And you have comments or questions for our guests today or us, make sure you put them in the comments and you could be part of the show. I'm your host, Richard Wilmore.
And I'm Constanza Rader. We have a veteran, an Arts for the Health of It podcast veteran today with us, Cathy Malchiodi. Oh my gosh, I said it earlier and it was absolutely correct.
Before, but now we're live. Yeah.
Of course.
Cathy Malchiodi and Stephan Wolfert. And we are talking about arts and health for veterans. Tomorrow is Veterans Day. We're recording this on November 10th. And these two do such amazing work with veterans that we wanted to have them on today, highlight the work that they're doing, and let people know that these types of resources exist for our veteran community.
And it's such an important topic. So we thought, why not up the level and go live and see if it still works?
Yeah. Well, Cathy, how about you tell a little intro to about yourself and a little bit about what you do with veterans, and then we'll have Stephan introduce them.
Yeah. So I actually started working with veterans a couple decades ago, but I didn't really get into it at that point. It was with Vietnam veterans. Fast forward, I started again in 2008, was asked by the Department of Defense to develop resiliency programs for children of the military. Actually, it was Navy SEALs. And I started that programming. But from then, there was so much spin-off into, working with the children. I was easily able to get the parents engaged. So I was able to get the military parent engaged with what the children were doing. And that kind of led to starting to work with the veterans and actually families and couples and using expressive methods. So, everything from doing things in terms of movement and sound and enactment. But they actually started from learning from their children and got really involved and invested in it. And I thought this was a terrific way to get people who might be suspicious of what's this expressive work about? Is it really going to work? Is it really going to be helpful? So, from 2008 until now, I continue. Some of it's been on telehealth. Now I'm getting back into real life with people as the pandemic is changing in whatever way, but I'm able to see people up front. So I also work with the Army, which is in my area, which is Fort Knox. So that's very close by. And I think now, looking back all those decades to the working with the Vietnam vets, they actually regret that they didn't have what now is very accessible. A lot of different kinds of expressive arts programs out there, arts and healthcare, what Stephan is doing. All these things are very much embraced by the people now that I work with. It's really gratifying to see that. See that that's happening. So we'll get into that more, I'm sure, in this conversation.
Yeah, that's awesome. And if you don't know, there's actually a national initiative called Creative Forces that's a partnership between the National Endowment for the Arts and Department of Defense to help fund these types of initiatives, right?
Yep.
Yay. They did something good. Well, Stephan, can you tell us a little bit about your journey and what you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. I want to acknowledge first that I'm currently on the stolen lands of the Massachusetts and Wampanoag, and I want to acknowledge also that tomorrow being Veterans Day can be really an extra challenge, more so than so many of the other days of the year, in my experience. So if for any veterans that are listening, and family vets, frankly, please use this as an opportunity to reach out for help if you haven't before. It's often the hardest thing or most difficult thing for us to do post-service. So I wanted to acknowledge that first, if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. And as far as how I got into the work, I'm patient zero. I was in the Army from 86 through 92. And when I got out, I had the transition issues now that are common, we hear as commonplace. I think more so as Cathy acknowledged, and I'm grateful for that. When I got out, it was post-Vietnam. We had the first Gulf War, Mogadishu, and Panama was my era of service, plus a bit more, School of the Americas and a few others. But I didn't really think I deserved PTSD. You know what I mean? It sounds weird, but or may sound weird, but I thought I can't be having problems. But I'd left the Army because I saw Shakespeare's Richard III. And this was, activation warning. We use activation warning rather than trigger warning because trigger has an entirely different connotation for military veterans. But activation warning for anyone listening or watching. I'm going to mention a few incidents that are not in graphic detail, but I had 2 soldiers commit suicide, and then the National Training Center, I had a friend killed in training. It just shouldn't happen. I mean, we hear about it happening, but it's sort of this arbitrary statistic that's foreign to us of how many die in training per year. So this happened right in front of me. I had snapped and literally left. I went AWOL technically, but I had a platoon sergeant and a first sergeant who were Vietnam veterans. So they covered for me. I was traveling around in Montana and on a train, as my show talks about, and actually saw Shakespeare's Richard III. And there's a veteran talking about how great he was in the military. In this case, it was a male in uniform, directly talking to the audience. Apologies for the coffee maker sounds going off.
I'll take a cup,
Caffeine is
please.
coming.
It's time for me to have more. That's my caffeine level in my blood saying you're low. But yeah, so I saw this veteran. I'd never been to a Shakespeare play before. I don't recall reading it. And here's this veteran saying, I was really great in the military, and now it's over. And I don't know where I fit in. Now what? Now what do I do? And that's exactly how I was feeling. And it was so impacting, and pardon my grammar. I left the Army, went to graduate school to become a classical actor, a Shakespeare actor. And in graduate school is where I was realizing that I do have things. And I wanted to blame the Army for everything that was, quote unquote, wrong with me, but it wasn't. A lot of this, as I learned from experts like Cathy, Bessel van der Kolk, Gabor Mate, these incredible leading researchers in the areas of trauma, are helping me, are giving me permission to look at my life and say, it's not what's wrong with me, but what happened to me. And those were the seeds of what is now my program called DE-CRUIT. Because and the name comes from the fact that we're recruited but never decruited. We have all this testing and training to get into the service and to make sure that we're fit for service. But when we get out, there's no testing or training to make sure that we're fit for society, fit to leave the military. And we have a manual for everything. So part of my goal was to literally try to create a manual that might be a resource and a community that's not about being veteran identity, that's not about helping others. It's solely focused on what happened to me, what habits have I created to survive either my childhood trauma or my military trauma or other adult trauma, and how can I rewire that? So our program, DE-CRUIT, came from that. It was several incarnations, but now we're teamed up with Dr. Alicia Ali at NYU, and we actually, for the first time in the last 7 years, have been able to actually scientifically evaluate it and look at it, take EEGs, the heart math, heart rate variability, self-disclosure surveys, and actually see if the arts help. As Cathy said, that now there's actually a record number of veterans service organizations, and specifically veterans arts-based service organizations. It's a record number, which is great.
That's
but
awesome.
Let's keep it. Let's not let it fall away and forget that there's a problem.
It's really remarkable what you just said, because I think back again, because that's where my starting place was, and doing a little bit of work with veterans who are Vietnam vets, but it was in the Veterans Administration Hospital. I was getting no buy-in, but I wasn't getting any support either. But now a lot of times I call them in to say to the younger, veterans, this is available to you. Go for it. We did not have this. We didn't understand it. But the veterans themselves, I think it's remarkable that they're initiating a lot of this, which is just the thing that you said about community. that community is part all relation, all in all humanity, human relationships are what heal. So to get back into community and get support from your peers, get those testimonials has just snowballed. It's really fantastic to be part of this at this point.
Well, Cathy, I wonder if you could dig into that a little bit more. Like, what are some of the, and Stephan, you can chime in on this as well. What are some of the unique challenges that veterans face for those that maybe don't know? And why the arts? Like, what is it about the arts that is so impactful for this population?
You want me to go first?
Go ahead.
Well, I think what I hear now, I'm just going to take, what I think is remarkable about Stephan's work with Dr. Ali is the fact that you have been able to measure so much and put together quantitative and qualitative data, which, doesn't happen that often. That to me, when I read all the papers that y'all have produced, I was like, wow. I mean, it really explained it. It measured the things that are so important to justify it and, get people to pay attention to it. But, what I hear, just the qualitative stuff, a lot of the veterans who come to work with me, they are active military as well, say, I heard that I don't have to talk if I get to work with you. Which is slightly true. They all talk eventually, but we can use movement. We can use sound. We can use enactment. You can be somebody else. You can pretend. You use your imagination. You can create imagery. There's such a variety of things that we can do together. And eventually it leads to storytelling. But their initial statement to me is, I've been in these other situations. I think the talk therapy's helped me to some extent. It's helped change some of the way I'm thinking, but I still have these sensations. I still don't feel regulated. I still have anger management problems. I'm having problems a little bit with addictions. But I heard that I don't have to be so not verbal here. I can be nonverbal. Well, and I heard that it's action oriented too. And I like to get moving. I like to feel that. That's the way I experience my work as a military, so, that action strength based. And I always say, when I got introduced by the Department of Defense to the work, my assignment was to develop resiliency based programs, strength building programs. So it's like Stephan said, not about what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. And this is the thing now I'm thinking about, and it seems to be helpful to talk about it within expanding capacity rather than acknowledging all these, we can acknowledge all these reactions that are disturbing and distressing and have created, distress in people's lives. But let's expand your capacity. You've come in the room here with me and you have a certain amount of it already, and you've had it in the past, and maybe now it feels a little constricted, but how do we expand that capacity? And I think the arts are so perfect for that. Yeah.
Thank you. That's awesome, Cathy. I'm sure Stephan has some input here too, and maybe you can get into some of the research that Cathy mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. And I want to acknowledge again, because I think that she goes so unrecognized, Dr. Ali's work. I end up being the face of it and out there talking about it a lot because I'm the military veteran, but she has worked tirelessly. I mean, those publications exist because of her. She's able to, I don't have, you can tell by me even trying to speak how severe my ADHD is among all the other alphabets after my name. I mean, everyone else has licenses. Mine are diagnoses. So she somehow wrangles my brain enough to record me and have me talk about what's happening in the room, create from that a measurement that she and her husband Bruce Homer at CUNY and the CREATE Lab design, and then they have very much what we have, which is the theater attack. Science and theater have more in common than we would think. Both are places where we're invited to fail, if I can put it that way. We're invited to try things that we know might fail. But the difference is in both theater and in this kind of science, no one dies, right?
Right.
Versus our old job, which it very much was a reality. It doesn't matter if I'm a water purification specialist or a clerk typist. My job will determine if how well I do or don't do it, will determine whether or not people die, either on my side or the other. Period. It's part of the machine, and we hear this from veterans, whether it's a refrigeration repair specialist who's denied PTSD benefits because he was told, and this is a true story, he was told, well, he was on a Tomahawk missile ship. Why would he possibly have PTSD? But he knew for every single missile that launched, that he was a part of making sure launched, many people died, and that weighed on him, which I'm getting a little on an off ramp. But this is, it's about, I'll back up. So back to my original point. So with Dr. Ali, she can do this, hear me talk about all this, wrangle it, create a measurement to try and figure out, well, what is trauma robbing from us? What are some of the things that we can possibly measure? The EEG gets tricky. Bessel van der Kolk laughs. He's like, "You're not measuring EEGs," because he's an expert in that. But we have measured it to some degree. In any case, let me actually attempt to answer the question. So
it's all good. So
okay, thank you for humoring me with that. So as the case was with me is. And then a Harvard study, and I believe it was the VA, and it may have also been a Department of Defense study as well. But what they showed was that military veterans, by and large, had much higher ACE scores. ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. So the short of that being that the people entering the military come from more extreme and probably traumatic childhoods. Now, this doesn't have to always be, we're not talking necessarily, locked in a closet and spit upon. This is a true story as well of a veteran and called horrible things by their mother, or a foster home or uncle, some of the stories that we get in the room. It doesn't have to be that. As Ed Tronick shows in his still face exercises, that the mere accidental neglect of a child affects the neurology of that developing infant. In a mother with postpartum depression, a mother who's battling addiction because of her own childhood trauma, a mother who's in a domestic violence situation, anything that causes her to retreat affects the actual neurological development of that child. And what this research showed was this, by and large, with these higher adverse childhood experiences, is who's entering the military. So of course it's attractive to us because what's it offering? All the things we didn't have as a child. Structure, how to breathe, how to find our new rhythm that's not our own, which is often out of rhythm. We're out of synchronicity, out of regulation with ourselves because of our childhood environment. If we have an alcoholic parent, if we have a depressed parent, the other one's depressed, whatever, or as is in my case, and again, activation warning, actual sexual abuse at a very young age. These things create all these symptoms that are in the DSM, the hypervigilance, the insomnia, the night terrors. These things are happening well before the military, but then the military figures out through rhythm and community how to rewire around that. They're taking the bulk of the society that most of the world wants to throw away, and they're saying, no, we can wire you for war. We can teach you how to fire a weapon. In the manual, we share with the veterans as a reminder, with activation warning, of course, an actual slide out of the manual that shows how to breathe when firing a weapon. There's multiple reasons for this. One is if you give the individual something to focus on that's body oriented, we're not thinking about what we're actually doing, because the military knows firsthand that by and large, we do not want to kill each other. The humans are hardwired to not. It's a rarity when someone does. And that's a whole other thing. But by and large, they're taking the vast majority of us, and they're weeding out, of course, the people who can't do this, but the breath and the rhythm, and also how to fire more accurately, how to still the body, even in this hyper arousal state. They'll have us breathe in and exhale, stay empty, and squeeze the trigger in between the heartbeats. Continue breathing, find the next target, hold your breath, squeeze the trigger in between the heartbeats. If that's too ethereal, think of military cadence. We've all seen it in a movie, right? Marching in rhythm, breathing in rhythm, not only singing, right? People have been told you have a horrible voice, you can't read, you're dyslexic, you can't do this, you can't, right? My wife calls it, it rhymes with biddy, but it's not committee since we're live, right? Other people call it the critics, but my wife calls it that committee, right? Which begin chiming in if you can't do this. But the military is saying, yes, you can. I'm going to take you to places you thought you couldn't go to. And what's going to get you through is the other people. So when I'm singing, when I'm daring to sing aloud in cadence, not only am I in rhythm, but I'm being echoed. I'm being resonated with other bodies. I'm more in my body than I may have ever been in my life. And I feel safe because I have this group, because I have this expression. So doesn't it make sense that these would be the same things that we'd use to unwire when we get out? And that's where the arts come in. And for us in particular, I use Shakespeare because it spoke to me. But we're not about like, it must be Shakespeare. Whatever expression works for you, as Cathy has worked with and knows the folks from combat paper, that tactile exercise of breaking down a uniform into a canvas to then paint whatever expression I need onto it. It's profound and brilliant to me that someone came up with that these veterans came up with that. And Cathy, a part of that. For me, it was the verse of Shakespeare's, the rhythm of Shakespeare's verse. And now I want to throw in, and wrangle me if I'm going on too long, but Strozier, Strozier, activation warning, I'm going to mention 9/11, but not in detail. He worked with survivors of 9/11. And when he worked with them and had them helping, this is right after, he's helping them process it. And they're just attempting to describe it in the room with him. And as I understand the research paper, his transcriber wrote it out in prose from one side of the page to the other. So when he read it, he couldn't make sense of it. He was wondering, what is this? It's a mess. So he went back and listened. And whenever they took a breath, he hit return. So whenever they took a new breath, he started a new line. And what he found was that survivors of trauma who are speaking aloud about their unprocessed trauma, still out of regulation, tend to speak in verse. And very often, as he puts it, with iambic feet.
Wow.
So Shakespeare's already writing in the language of trauma, iambic pentameter, right? In school, it's inflicted on us, like, learn what that means. I don't know. Iambic is the heartbeat, and the pentameter is just 5 heartbeats per breath, or 5 stressed syllables per line. To be or not to be, that is the question. Then take a breath, reset the limbic system, deactivate the ventral vagus response. Keep yourself in your body, in the room. And in Shakespeare's day, the audience was lit because it was in the middle of the day. So they're making eye contact, which also helps keep you in the room, helps you keep right here and speak about your deepest, darkest secrets in poetry, in these words and vowels and consonants that may cause the body to vibrate, which is usually dangerous or previously was dangerous. And then to take a breath and speak the next line. And on top of it, to be witnessed and to be received rather than judged, to be accepted. Perhaps not, not, even if you're speaking something that's, as Shakespeare puts it, to speak what we feel and not what we ought to say. Other veterans go, oh, all right, I'm not alone. They're starting to attack the symptoms of PTSD, isolation. I'm all alone in my misery. I'm crazy. My hypervigilance is necessary. Let's create a room to where maybe I can look and see where the escape route is, my egress route. But once I know it's there, I can maybe settle into listening to this rhythm a bit more. And we know also from studies, not ours, but others, that people in a theater entrain, that we find each other's breath and rhythm. So with Shakespeare, as it's being put out there, as the chorus comes out and says, oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention, a kingdom for a stage, princes to act and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. So that rhythm, that breath, we fall into that and we actually settle into that rhythm and feel safer. I won't say safe, I'll say safer, because it's a lie to say that veterans or survivors of trauma actually feel safe. We can feel safer to a degree, but I digress. I've taken a lot of time. I hope that was helpful though.
Like Please don't apologize. All of that was amazing.
So before I forget, you said two important foundations there to translate it over into trauma-informed work. The self-regulation, which I find fascinating with Shakespeare, because in hip hop, this contemporary manifestation, we have this similar beat, so this turns up in other kinds of art expressions, right? So hip hop therapy has gotten so popular now. It's been out there for a while, but it has exactly what you're talking about. And then you're saying about the audience, and that contact and that attunement. There's the co-regulation, so sometimes we talk about these things as two separate things, but I almost think they're married together. You have to have both to start to achieve that regulation. And like you said, to feel safer, and then that joins with community. So, I'm always looking at those things too, to prepare people that I've worked with to join into programs like Stephan's program or other things that the military have developed. Because once they start to understand those two things, when they go into these other programs and experience them again, that sets the stage for them to be able to do the deep exploration, right? I mean, that's the next thing. And I think in trauma work, I think sometimes we've skipped that first part. And we expect people just to explore all these feelings and all this stuff. And like you say, activation warning, it stirs up a lot without having those two foundations there. So I think, what Stephan's done with this programming and Alicia Ali and measuring actually the mechanisms of change, it's profound. But there are those two basic human things that we all need. We need to be able to feel safer, but we also need to feel safe with. So we need that regulation, and we need that support from community. So that's why I think this is just so amazing to me. It's just, it's wonderful. So many different things that just come into my mind about getting people to the place of feeling comfortable to explore, express, tell their stories in all these different art forms, so enactment and theater and improvisation, is one way to go. And it's restorative, ultimately. That's the end game. How do we get people through these other pieces to start to feel this restoration in their body and soul and spirit, so to speak?
Yeah.
That's a great way to put that. And Stephan, when you were talking about the community and the cadence and the rhythm and the that deep connection that military personnel form with each other, it really made me think of there's many men in my life that are veterans. My brother is a Marine combat vet in Afghanistan. My other brother is a Marine. My husband was in the Navy. My brother-in-law was in the Army, and Richard was married. He was a military spouse. And one of the things that my brother, who is the Afghanistan veteran, always said was coming home was so hard because you go from this tight-knit community where you have each other's back, and you would die for the person next to you, no matter what background you came from, like your brothers. And then you go into civilian life where, especially for men, finding that type of community is almost impossible. And he's lost more friends to suicide than he did in war. And a lot of that he talks about is they feel so lonely and they don't know where to fit in. And so, like, I'm gonna get choked up. So, like, the work that you're doing to DE-CRUIT to help them find that outside of the military is life-saving. It's incredible.
Thank you. I and truly, I wish I could sit here and take all the credit and go, thank you. Yes, I created it all. It's an absolute community, creating the community and recreating it all the time. As I mentioned, like with theater, being willing to try things that might not work, just to teach ourselves that what that would feel like, right? That we can survive that experience of trying something that might not work, because the military is on a binary. Our childhood survival was on a binary, right? The military teaches go, no go. But to live in that in-between area where art is of well, what's the right answer? I don't know, is how DE-CRUIT was created. It was me coming in and saying, well, this is this is what I've created as a container for me to try and examine what trauma has robbed from me and how to reclaim the habits that were robbed from me, to reinstill a sense of being in the present moment. But what worked for me may not work for you. So the other veterans to come in and say, as you said, some who had that community, which I'll come back to in a minute, but there are a great many that come to me and say, I didn't have that in the military. And what the studies show is that the higher incidence of PTSD is for veterans who, when they served, did not have a sense of community or camaraderie. And also it's exacerbated, like you said, when they get out, if they did not have a community to fall into, a receptive community to help, again, speak what they feel and not what they ought to say. Those are some of the indicators towards a higher incidence of self-slaughter, as Hamlet puts it. But back to the community thing that you mentioned, Maslow, when he created his hierarchy of needs, right after expressed openly that he wished he had included community in the hierarchy of needs. It's absolutely a part of what we need. So think of that in healing. And like I mentioned, in the military, many of the women veterans that I've worked with over the years, and Jenny Pakanowski has this incredible group called Women Veterans Empowered and Thriving out of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. When I've had the great fortune to work with them, not speaking for all, but what was something that's often shared is that women veterans did not have the same camaraderie that the male veterans had. A friend of mine who was Air Force assigned to an Army unit in a combat zone did not have the same sense of camaraderie that the men he was serving with, and that was all men at that point, had. So where do they fit in? And what is that ripping apart of our being do? And how do we put that back together again? And the reason I say that the community is, it's not just veterans that helped me form this. I was lucky enough to meet Randy Reinholds, who was the founder of Native Voices in Los Angeles, founding artistic director. And through him, I met Yvette Nolan, who at that time ran Native Earth in Canada. In the indigenous population, their mission statement, very clear: develop original works by Native Americans for the stage. Couldn't be clearer. There's no word of trauma in that. Yet, as I was lucky enough to be in the room to share. I'm not indigenous, let me state. I was allowed to be in the room to play other roles. I was happy to play the other roles and just be in the room and see how a decolonized rehearsal process looked. And it was so attractive to me. It was so antithetical to what I learned in grad school. I'm proud of all the actor training I've received. But in full disclosure, I think a great deal of it was unkind. I think a great deal of it is very colonial, right? The time structure, and you got to learn these 4 scenes on your own, no rehearsal time, and you better show up, and you better leave your baggage at the door. Yet you better cry when I need you to, and you better do this, right? All this BS, and they're saying here's 600 years of genocide and oppression and slavery, and in a room, and I'm watching a group process this, through theater. And it's through the indigenous community, and Yvette Nolan specifically, where I ask permission, but also share the term theater as medicine, or the medicine of theater, because they openly treat it as medicine. And when I was in all the acting training I do is like, no, it's not therapy. It's therapeutic, but it's not therapy. Well, that's not how I experience it. It's absolutely helping me mitigate my post-traumatic stress symptoms. It's absolutely the reason I was able to get sober and stay sober. It's absolutely the reason I went from daily, multiple times a day, contemplating suicide, moving towards that end, to a place of where it's a rare occurrence. That is through theater, it is through the arts, and it's through the community of artists that I've been able to be around that has kept me in check more than any other program. CPT, CBD, CB. Sorry, CB.
That too.
We can't edit that out. We can't edit that out.
But yeah, anyways, you get. Well, I think it's a good place for me to.
I love Facebook Live.
Speaking of CBD, I have a brand I'd like to put.
It goes great in coffee. Did you go get coffee? Do you need coffee?
Me?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Why
Oh, you
not?
There's the coffee.
Cheers. Everybody had
Always.
a cheers to our coffee. I have a question. Stephan, you said earlier that there's a record number of arts organizations for military people. Are these programs easily accessible and found by military, or are these like where they have access to, like, that they're told about them, or are these programs that aren't really talked about and they need to do the research to find them?
I think the
Makes sense?
latter. I think that this common rift is so true in any population, right? There are the resources available, but they're not out there, not easily. I mean, they are, but I don't know how you get coverage. I'll give you an example. Amanda Cherry in Kansas City has a group called Charlie Mike Theater, and they're doing incredible work there. And there's such a large number of veterans in the Midwest, and they're spread out so far. And with this age, they could find her virtually, but they have to have the means, right? They have to have adequate Wi-Fi. They have to have the means to buy an adequate device that will get them on that Wi-Fi to join her, or to be able to travel to her. And then on top of that, how is she with a budget smaller than even we have? And my wife and I literally live in a van. Yes, sometimes down by the river for my Chris Farley fans. But we literally are living in a van to keep the cost down. And our budget's small, hers is smaller. How do we get out there? And as Cathy mentioned, I'm not one that tags on the VA. I'm a fan of the VA. They do way more great than bad. There are inherent problems. There's a mass of bureaucracy. There are, there's plenty of ego. There's plenty of things getting in the way. And it's next to impossible to get in their system where they're going, hey, let me get you access to, not only do we advertise Charlie Mike Theater, not only do we advertise Jenny Pakanowski's group, but we're going to help you get connected to them. None of that's happening. And I don't even mean to put it all in the VA. Look at the Department of Defense's budget. Right? Look at the amount of money that we've historically spent on war, and how a sliver of it is argued over for veterans care and veterans family, who, by the way, are 3 times the number of veterans and also need the same amount of care at least. And we have to argue not only about the money, but whether there's even a problem. Is there a problem with veterans? Well, is the suicide rate 22 a day? Let's argue about it so that we don't have to actually deal with the problem. I get obviously passionate about it because it pisses me off. Right? It's that gets us in the way. So to answer your question, no, it's not easily found. But yes, there are a record number of them.
I want to go back to that accessibility thing too, because you have a commonality with some of the other programming, in that, you long before the movie, was it Nomad's Land came out? Yeah. There are a lot of, the Combat Paper started that way. Combat Paper had a little VW bug, and they figured out a way to pack up the paper grinding, uniform grinding equipment, and to fit it in one suitcase. Wow. And fit it in there, and actually be able to drive the bug. They have to have 2 people at least in there, sometimes 3, with all their equipment, and go to place to place to place to introduce the process. That's how they created the franchises. Right. So people learned, and but it started out in the East Coast, either in Vermont or New Hampshire, somewhere around there, just as this little thing that veterans word of mouth heard about, and so that was a very small community at that point. But then, like you've been doing, going around, like you live in a van. I mean, it's going around to places to introduce this, because a lot of veterans don't have access to the internet. They don't know what's going on. There's some more centralized places now they could look for things, but they don't know what those are either. I mean, Creative Forces has been helpful because that program keeps expanding. But yeah, I think the accessibility thing, to me, I'm amazed that people find these things. They find these little theater groups. They find Combat Paper. They find art making groups, and what I do is try to stay in touch with people on social media that are running these, so that I have a running list to tell people, Because that's kind of the thing I want to have happen in what I'm doing is, okay, you're working with me one-to-one. We're working on the regulation pieces. We're working on getting you ready to be out there exploring and feeling safer, right? Just like Stephan said, I want to have these places that I can refer them to. And it certainly doesn't go through the VA, unfortunately. It comes down to individual practitioners or artists or people that are involved in this to get that word out. So hopefully that's going to change and get bigger and in some more foundational place where people can go. Yeah.
Isn't there, I feel like I remember my husband having to take a class when he was leaving the military that was like the premise of the class was, here's how you go back to civilian life.
Yeah.
Like, here's how to put together your resume for a civilian job, things like that.
Yeah.
And it feels like this would be a really great little add-on. Like, here are now the resources to help you DE-CRUIT, to help you mentally, emotionally, physically, socially reintegrate into society. Like, why isn't that part of the process?
Yeah.
The exit process, the exit interview process.
Well, put you in touch with communities, again, it does come back to that.
Right. Absolutely, Cathy. And to your point, Cosenza, do you recall how long he said that was? It was probably the TAPS program. Do you recall?
Yes, I couldn't remember the name. Thank you.
TAPS. Do you recall how long he said that was?
It wasn't very long.
Yeah. And most a few days, sometimes a few hours is what I'm hearing. There are individual units that have, or people who've left, veterans who've left specific units, specifically the Navy, and is my memory, if memory serves, they've said that there was a single commander here and there that made it more expansive. But to your point, that is the question. Basic training, right? Think the name is exactly what it means. Basic training to get into the military. It's not your job training. It's not what you're going to do in the military, just to make sure that you can do what they need, know who to salute, when to salute, how to wear a uniform, how to walk, how to talk, how to stand, how to breathe, how to do these things. Not even your job yet. The basics is 8 weeks long. And that is 24/7, right? It's not, you're not getting 10 hours of rest each night. 8 weeks. But then and that's just to get in. Then your job training, which is weeks, usually months. And then you're in a unit, minimum 2 years, 4, 6, 8 years, sometimes often longer. And in the case of Iraq and Afghanistan, if you're deployed, it's usually multiple deployments because it went on 21 years, or 20 plus years. So getting out 3 days is going to do it? No. Same reason that the efficacy of so many of the sobriety programs that are, 30 days aren't great. They have success, but it's not because these 30 days versus 30 years. It's about creating a real integrated, comprehensive program that's exiting. Because you mentioned too, the resume, for example, how to do the resume and how to do this, how to balance your checkbook. I'm not denigrating those skills that they're offering. They should. They absolutely should be doing it while we're in as well. But the statistics show that even if we leave the military and a veteran gets a job, statistically, we're less likely to keep that job. Statistically, we're less likely to be functioning well at that job. I'm just talking statistically. You would think it's the opposite, but we have so many odds against us because of our childhood environment and the military. We have a higher addiction rate, higher suicide rate, higher homelessness rate, higher, harsher, longer prison sentences. That's from the Department of Justice. So we have all these stats against us. Why can't we create at least an 8-week exit program? I want to give a shout out to James Gilligan, who did this successfully. Not with veterans. He worked for Massachusetts state prisons. He wrote several books, but his book Violence covers this. Incredible book. DE-CRUIT was initially formed heavily after James Gilligan's work, and he and his wife Carol Gilligan helped us a great deal early on in forming, going, that will work, that might not, kind of thing. His program was in Massachusetts state prisons with men, and he worked with the most violent male criminals that they were locking away. His program was 4.5 months in residence, no more solitary confinement. He said it's torture. He points out often when he goes to prisons to the warden, he said in the 70s, zoos realized that solitary confinement causes illness in the animals and they die or kill each other, or kill themselves. But we changed the architecture of zoos, but we still have the same architecture in prisons and jails, right? So first of all, community, Maslow's big change he wanted to make. Got them together, lived together, 4.5 month, daily regimented, structured self-compassion, self-kindness, being in the body, processing our work. It's not just about talking about what happened to me. That matters, but it's about when I talk about it, what's my physiological experience? What's happening in my body? And helping to rewire that, helping to capture first, recognize it, then help recover from it. And eventually, the more efficient we get at that, we can actually be preventative about it. We can anticipate it, much like PTSD therapy dogs or pets, how they recognize it's coming on. They see it. We can do that for ourselves as well. That's what he was doing. And by the way, James Gilligan's program included Shakespeare because he studied at Shakespeare and Company in Lenox, Massachusetts under Tina Packer. So he brought a lot of those skills from Shakespeare acting and Shakespeare's verse into the prisons. It was successful. He cut their return rate, the recidivism rate, by over 80%.
Oh my
He
gosh.
cut the daily violence, which was, if I remember correctly, was previously double digits daily, to single digits annually. It worked. I won't get into why it was cut because that takes us down the path of, let's stay on the positive. He had a working program. It's out there. The arts are healing. The indigenous community has taught me that. James Gilligan has taught me that. There are so many other groups that have shown us the model. The ancient Greeks, you can wrangle me in, but look at the ancient Greek plays. All of those playwrights, Aeschylus, Sophocles, they were all military veterans. Writing plays, which is usually considered, oh, it's not masculine. It's not. They're writing their experiences of war, putting it on stage for everyone in the audience who is either a veteran or a family of a veteran to hear. This is where we get the term catharsis from seeing and hearing these plays and having it affect us so deeply that we shake, we tremble, we cry, even have purging like Ed Tick talks about in his book, War and the Soul, where he took Vietnam veterans back to Vietnam. They had these kinds of catharses. Physical catharses.
There's a deeper reason here too. I mean, go past the Greek culture into just humanity for thousands of years. And this is why I get excited about what you do, and why I think theater, enactment, improvisation, role play, the field of drama therapy, all these different components are so powerful, because it's the only actual art form that brings together, I think, the 4 healing practices that have been used for thousands of years. And I don't know if I talked about this on our previous podcast, but it's movement and gesture and using the body, getting into the body. You have to stand there in front of the audience. You're going to, take a stance of some kind or be moving. There's sound, whether that's the vocalization, vibrations, the sound of other actors, the sound from the audience, all that piece is in there. There's rhythm involved in both of those, the movement and the sound. Then there's the storytelling, even if you're acting a part that you didn't write and you're in that moment, you're telling that story through your body, through your own sound. So that storytelling piece comes out. There's all the visual that goes with that too, of the staging and, everything, the sets and all this. And then there's also those moments of silence, that occur in that, where you have to be resonant with moments that are pauses or meditative or mindful, engaging actually with yourself or with the audience. That's why I think that this is kind of the only art form that combines all of that. So I think, humanity knew that in their rituals and ceremonies and writing up stories that they performed for thousands of years. So I just, when somebody doesn't get this, why this works, I think like, hey, it's been done. Like concept with all these Greek playwrights, who and again, I think that's really fascinating that they came from military backgrounds. So there's another piece there, But if we keep drilling back into what's gone on in this world amongst humans, this has been the most probably relational, community oriented, but also personally engaging on all these different levels of how you can express yourself. So I think that's, and I'm not Dr. Ali, who's done the research on the mechanisms. I'm just watching it from that kind of, it's almost like an anthropological, ethnology kind of viewpoint, which is just as valid in some ways because it's the qualitative expression of humankind in their own struggle through trauma and loss to heal.
Yeah. Beautiful, Cathy. Thank you.
Amazing.
I want to hop on with that beautiful sharing you just offered, because I failed to mention, when you said that about the culmination, everyone's different. So I'm with you. I personally feel that the voice is where, the mind and body meet. It's where we can also observe really easily the manifestations of trauma, right? If we have a squashed voice, or as you see me constantly collapse to try and be invisible as my childhood, and how to open up against that. But Roman Baca has created Exit 12 Dance. He was a professional ballet dancer in New York. 9/11 happened, joined the Marines, came back, created Exit 12 Dance, which uses dance and movement. But it's the same, I would say, same, to borrow your phrase, Cathy, same mechanisms, right? It's still breath, rhythm, and community, or breath and rhythm in community. So as they're and storytelling. So the dancing or moving, which for many, like our dear friend Everett Cox, he saw my solo show Cry Havoc, and I do a dance at the end. Spoiler alert. It's not at all. But I do a dance because it was my dream to become a dancer. And so this is sort of my opportunity to go, all right, it doesn't matter if I'm good or not. I want to dance. I want to dare to do something that I'm not great at in public, and have you in maybe it's received. And Everett always said after the show, he came to the show multiple times and said, I could never dance. I could never dance. And I said, oh, you have to meet Roman. Roman has a way of bringing people into their bodies to move in ways that they didn't think they could. And imagine the power. I'm getting choked up just even talking about it. We're not, for those of us who grew up with such self-loathing, to be so present in our bodies and to be seen as we're in our bodies, which is a place of deep terror and loathing for so long. My God, that's powerful. It's a powerful place to be. So whether it's through music or dance or painting or voice and text, I think that all should be interwoven. I think you should be exposed to all of them. I think, in Shakespeare's day, classical actors were trained in every area, just like warriors were trained in every area. They were the same thing. You were trained in the martial arts as well as the arts. You were trained in poetry as much as sword play. Right. So we have this expression: you had to learn how to write and read and recite it and dance as much as you had to fight. And I think there's something there in that to be brought in, a synergy that we could bring back to some degree.
I feel like we could have this conversation for forever. It's such amazing work, and it's so cool to see that combination of the arts and the science of this work to show efficacy, to inform, best practices and all the good stuff that's happening through the work both of you guys are doing. It's awesome.
I'm glad that Stephan brought up Roman Baca, because he is truly amazing. I mean, what he's done. And, he's been the inside. I've known him on and off for about 10 years. And he's been the inspiration for me to let loose and do runway dances with 20-something and 30-something-year-old military. And, we pretend we're Bruno Mars. I mean, why not? Again, this is kind of like an offshoot of theater, get into the performance of it. You can imagine. That's the other thing I wanted to say. I mean, all the work about theater, that's one of the things I think about a lot, is how to engage, again, to feel safer in engaging in the imagination and play and curiosity. So we just get curious about ourselves as different, great performers. We may not be the greatest, but put on that music and set up that runway dance, just like Soul Train. That gives me away for my age. and just start moving, but that's a performance too, because you start to imagine yourself as some other character, right?
That's it.
So
Yeah.
and that imaginative power, when somebody's ready for it, feels the regulation and the co-regulation in the community to be able to engage in that, is a powerful change agent. It's just it's the most profound change agent in the arts themselves.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it offers enough aesthetic distance, right, Cathy, to where you can get as far or as close to that character as you want. That allows you that level of safety. Then provides the language that I may lack from my own experience, whether it's Shakespeare or movement or what have you, song, hip hop or what have you, and then eventually add my own language for myself to be up there. I want to give, because I know we're running probably at the time, but I do want to say that this is just about the present trauma. This doesn't even include intergenerational trauma. We haven't even gotten to that, which we've now proven exists. So we'll have to do another podcast on that. And I want to give a shout out to there are veterans working on this. If I may say, my sister in the arms and healing, Damasa Doyle, is in Brooklyn, and said, you know what, she's a military veteran, and said, I want to create a program that's for veterans of color who are in Brooklyn. I mean, she got very specific because she looked and there wasn't one. So she created Dama Soul, this program, and she deals directly with this intergenerational trauma. What is it like to be a person of color, to then serve in the military that actually caused oppression and genocide on this very soil that we're on? What's that like? How do we bring the ancestors into the practice? So that's another podcast. You have to have her on for that.
I can't wait.
Yeah, so.
Richard, you had something you were gonna.
Yes, I have two final questions, and of course, unfortunately, we are out of time. But we'll come back next week. I don't know. We'll just do this all the time.
Yes,
this was fun. Two final questions for both of you. What was the last creative thing you each did, and how can people best connect with both of you?
Wow. Well, I was just in northern New Mexico teaching, and one of the first reparative experiences for me, because it was 3 days of engaging in expressive arts with a small group of people. Kept the group, we were in the pandemic, still kept the group small. We were at Ghost Ranch, which is George O'Keeffe's land in northern New Mexico, Abiquiu, and getting to engage with people in movement and art making and sound and enactment. We did so much improvisational work, but I have to say, right, that's the creative piece. But for me to be in a community live doing the work again, I can't even describe I'm getting goosebumps, those restorative moments that I had and continuing to have, because we've been immobilized by the pandemic. And I think that's one of the things about the creative process, the imagination, the expressive work, is about mobilizing. You're action oriented. You're not being still in it. You have to express in some way, whether it's small or large, the mobilizing the body in that way, and the mind and the spirit was tremendous for me. I know it's good for everybody else, but boy, I came away with such a gift from that interaction. Yeah.
And how can they reach you, Cathy?
How can people reach out to you?
You know my website, don't you have it?
Well, for everyone listening.
Okay, www.cathymalchiodi.com. And if you Google me, you're going to find me.
All of the things. A long list.
Not that hard.
She won't say it, so I will. She's kind of a thing. She's amazing.
Stephan?
I can be reached, so I don't forget. Our website is www.DE-CRUIT.org. DE-CRUIT spelled just like recruit, but with a D. D-E-C. Perfect. There it is. DE-CRUIT.org. You can also email us through there, and it'll go to my wife, Dawn Stern, who's the COO, because she replies to the emails. I get about 150 a day, and sometimes just go no and shut it off. As far as projects, thank you for asking, or what we're doing, the latest thing. We are right now, and we just in this time, I think it went out, our email for our fundraiser, because we have 3 new projects that we've developed started pre-pandemic, but continued through the pandemic, that will go up off Broadway this July and August, and then tour as we have been throughout the country, with special nods to Syracuse Stage, Cincinnati Shakespeare and Amphibian Stage Productions in Fort Worth, Texas, who helped us with this. These were truly community driven theater events. You know, we have this term community theater as amateur, but we're reclaiming it as like so many others, of community as in a community creating projects. And what we have is 3 new Shakespeare adaptations that are an hour, about an hour or less, because we found that people prefer my show Cry Havoc is about an hour and a quarter. Just at about an hour, they start to squirm a little and go, this is a lot to handle for this long. So we went an hour or less. And there are about 3 specific areas of trauma that not just veterans, but anyone who feels like an other experiences. My wife and I did the adaptations. The first one is about Richard III. It's called The Head of Richard, and it's focusing on attachment disorder. So this is addressing specifically the relationship with his mother, and how, not blaming, this is just what causes, what happens, right? And what are the after effects? And Shakespeare does this so brilliantly. So in Richard's case, he starts on the field of battle and his mother's cursing him and saying, you've been a problem since you were in my womb. You've been a nightmare. And what does that do? Because I argue he was made as much as he was born, if not more. And then goes on and has these horrible relationships with women. Lo and behold, surprise, surprise, not at all, right? So we have Lady Anne, Elizabeth. The other 2 shows, Macbeth. I know some people hate the term, or you think it's cursed. I don't, but it's called Make Thick My Blood. You talked about movement, Cathy. Alexandra Beller is directing that. She's a brilliant choreographer. So this is as much a piece that's choreographed as it is spoken. From the very beginning to the end, it's the movement, focusing on Laban, which is also in that Head of Richard that I mentioned, because Roman Baca is choreographing that, and Jason O'Connell is directing it. But Make Thick My Blood addresses PTSD, straight up classic PTSD. The Macbeths lose their child. That's where we're starting. And then it's exacerbated by him going to combat. And then they make really awful choices because they're viewing the world through a trauma lens. The third piece is called She-Wolf. It's about Shakespeare's Margaret of Anjou. Generally speaking, we've throughout history she's the only character to show up in 4 Shakespeare plays, by the way. But very often the adaptations are focused on the men of those 4 plays and how do we tell the War of the Roses. But my wife said, no, I'm just going to focus on Margaret, because Margaret is an immigrant. She's brought from France to England. She's a woman in a man's world. She's completely an outsider. My wife, as an African-American and a woman in this world, said, I identify with it. She's adapted this to be us observing the trauma of being the other on stage. So it's Make Thick My Blood, Richard, and She-Wolf, coming to you soon. But
Wow, that's
literally,
so cool.
yes, I did. She's still there promoting it.
We should have thrown her on here. But also shout out to Dawn, because she did swoop in when we were scheduling this, and your interview was scheduled in like 4 minutes. So she was on top of it. We're very honored to have both of you on today, and we can't thank you enough for being here and jumping with us and being live on our first live podcast. So we have,
as a tech question, can we help you post this after we sign off here?
of course.
It will be on your site. Yeah.
Yes. And then it'll get turned into an actual podcast that'll go out on all of the things, all the podcast platforms as well. So make sure you subscribe to YouTube or our Facebook or our podcast, wherever you watch us or listen to us. We have new episodes every Wednesday. And don't forget to keep creating, everyone. Bye.